Thank you. Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you to Bay Area educators. Thank you to the CTA. I have only one correction. I was not one of the architects of No Child Left Behind. My error was in supporting it in the first place, but I cannot take credit or blame for being an architect. Got to make that perfectly clear. What I do want to say, though, is that over the weekend, as I was preparing to come here, I did what I do every year at this time, which is I read Dr. Martin Luther King. And I came across a line that helped me prepare to speak to you. Dr. King was speaking in Washington in 1959 to some 20,000 young people who had come to Washington to rally on behalf of school integration. And he said to them, among other things, make a career of humanity. And I thought, that's why I'm coming to speak to you. You have made a career of humanity. Thank you so much for what you do every day. So, American public education, you know, is in crisis. But it's not the crisis you read about. It's not the crisis that you'll see in the movies or on television. It's not the crisis that pundits write about, and it's not the one that Bill Gates and Arne Duncan and Michelle Rhee talk about. American public education is in crisis because it's under attack. It's an existential crisis. Never has there been such a sustained assault on the very survival of public education. False claims are made about achievement. False claims are made about teachers. False claims are made about what's needed to improve our schools, and miracle cures are offered that have no evidence whatever behind them. Public education today is the target of a well-coordinated, well-funded campaign to privatize as many schools as possible. This campaign says that it wants great teachers in every classroom, but its rhetoric demoralizes teachers and its actions reduce the status of the teaching profession. The leaders of this national movement call themselves reformers, but I think it's more appropriate to refer to them as corporate reformers. They want education to operate in accordance with business principles, with free market principles, not as a public service. They want parents to be consumers and children to be products. They want teachers and principals to be at-will employees. They want to impose simple-minded policies of carrots and sticks on educators, but this is not what great corporations do. Great corporations recruit the best people and then they pamper them. Every year, Fortune magazine has a list of the best companies in the US to work for. The best corporations treat their employees with respect. The best company this year, I looked it up, offers free on-site health clinics, childcare, car cleaning, a beauty salon, gourmet food, and a state-of-the-art gymnasium. One of them even offers a climbing wall. That's kind of like your schools, right? The best and the most productive corporations are the best places to work. So bear in mind, teachers' working conditions are children's learning conditions. Unfortunately, the leaders of this corporate reform movement don't want our schools to function like 21st century workplaces. They don't want workplaces that are beautiful for students and faculty because that would cost too much. They never talk about how to make schools more creative and exciting places for students and teachers. Instead, they talk about how to cut costs, whom to fire, how to cut benefits and pensions, how to make educators do more with less. They belittle the people who do the daily work of teaching children. What they have in mind is not an environment where people take joy in their work, but something like the factories of the early 20th century, where your pay is directly linked to your piecework, and the floor boss can fire anyone for any reason, whatever. The corporate reformers now have the upper hand for one simple reason, not because they have good ideas, not because their ideas are evidence-based, but because they have a huge amount of money and political power. They can count on the Gates Foundation, the Eli Broad Foundation, the Walton Family Foundation, and other foundations. They can count on the Wall Street hedge fund managers who belong to an organization called Democrats for Education Reform. They can count on groups like Stand for Children, Education Reform Now, 50 State Can, Teaching First, Teach Plus, Students First, even the United Way, and others funded by the Gates Foundation. They can count on the DC think tanks, funded by the Gates Foundation and the other foundations. They can count on Fox News, the Wall Street Journal. They can count on right-wing billionaires across the country who promote charters and vouchers and who want to destroy teachers' unions. They can count on entrepreneurs eager to turn a profit with public funds. They can count on conservative Republican governors like Scott Walker of Wisconsin, who hopefully will be recalled very soon. But also Chris Christie of New Jersey, Rick Snyder of Michigan, Rick Scott of Florida, Mitch Daniels of Indiana, John Kasich of Ohio, Tom Corbett of Pennsylvania, Bobby Jindal of Louisiana, and many others. Unfortunately, they can also count on Secretary Arne Duncan. What they don't have on their side, though, is truth. Also, they don't have evidence. Also, they can't point to any successes. That's sort of a lot to be missing, isn't it? Truth, evidence, successes. But facts, truth, evidence, experience, and logic don't count when there's so much money and power on one side of the struggle. So what I plan to do this evening is to go over the evidence with you, to arm you with the facts you need to know to support your public schools and your profession. The other side will always have more money, but we must remain firm in our conviction that you can't fool all the people all the time. An informed public, I believe, and we must believe, will not tolerate the abandonment of public education. An informed public will not let the elites and the ideologues and the billionaires privatize the schools that belong to all the people. That was certainly true in Ohio last fall, when 61% of the voters repealed a law that eliminated collective bargaining rights. Thank you, Ohio. We have not reached the point in this country where people who work for a living are not allowed to join unions, where unions are not allowed to represent their members. It's happened in some states, but it's not happened in California. We have not yet rolled back the New Deal, which built this building. Please recall that when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, he was in Memphis to help sanitation workers organize into a union against the wishes of the power structure. And yet so many of these corporate reformers claim his legacy. How dare they? The corporate reform movement began with No Child Left Behind, and that law, as you know, mandates that 100% of students must be proficient in math and reading by the year 2014. No state is on track to meet this goal. No nation in the world has ever met this goal. That unrealistic mandate created a crisis atmosphere and has set the stage for delegitimating public education. Currently, under this law, about half our nation's public schools are deemed to be failing schools. By 2014, many more will be labeled failing. Is there any other legislature in the world besides our Congress that has ever passed a law stigmatizing most of the nation's public schools as failures? I can't think of any. It's so wrong. We have the biggest, most successful economy in the world. We have the greatest higher education institutions in the world. Other nations look to us because our innovations and our creativity. Surely, some of this success is due to the 90% of the population educated in our public schools. I'm proud to say that I am one of them. Thank you. I'm a graduate of San Jacinto High School in Houston, Texas. The corporate reformers will tell you that our public schools have declined in the past 50 years, but they won't tell you, I assume they don't know, that critics were complaining about the public schools 50 years ago. Seems to be a parlor game in American history. These so-called reformers idealize a time when our public schools were racially segregated, when they had no obligation to educate students with disabilities, and when they had relatively few students who did not speak English. Our public schools have met all of these challenges and more. They are a fundamental democratic institution. We cannot afford to lose them. We must improve them and not privatize them. Race to the top is NCLB 2.0. Race to the top means more high-stakes testing, more privatization of public schools, more punishment for teachers and principals, more closing of schools that enroll large numbers of low-performing students. A race to the top of what? Education is a right, not a race. I know this because 18 months ago when I was awarded the Friend of Education Award at the NEA convention, the CTA, I think it was the San Diego branch, gave me a t-shirt and it said, "Education is a right, not a race." So let's remember that. A race has one winner and a lot of losers. That's not what we want for our children. A teacher wrote me recently to predict that this corporate reform movement would implode within 5 years. I hope he's right. He said, "There's just so far you can go without any evidence to support your claims. At a certain point, the public will wake up and realize that this movement has two policy goals, and neither one of them will produce better education. Goal number one, privatization. The corporate reformers believe that the private sector is always better than the public sector, so they do whatever they can to destroy public confidence in public education. They write books and articles, they make movies about the crisis in the schools, they make heroes of those who heap scorn on public schools and on teachers. They make up fantastic tales about the superiority of competition in the free market. One thing they will never do is admit that research does not support their claims. Nor will they admit that their agenda is not new. It's the traditional right-wing agenda. The agenda of cutting cost, privatizing education, and destroying teachers' union. This is not new, and it's not reform. Nor will they mention how deregulation contributed to, some would say caused, the collapse of the stock market in 2008, or how deregulation permitted Enron, Madoff, and dozens of other scams to fleece investors. Goal number two of the corporate reform movement is deprofessionalization. They don't believe that any preparation is needed to become a teacher, or for that matter, to become a principal or a superintendent. They think that anyone should be allowed to teach, because to them, teaching is not a profession, it's just a job. They don't care how much turnover there is. They think turnover is a great thing. They want to remove every requirement that stands in the way of putting inexperienced people into these positions of responsibility. The corporate reformers say teachers don't need certification, they don't need master's degrees. They say that teachers shouldn't be paid extra for experience. They say that professional development and teacher training is a waste of time. They're ready to throw open the schoolhouse doors to anyone who wants to teach and then evaluate them based on their students' test scores. They want to turn teachers into testing technicians. They claim that teachers can never be fired. They ignore the fact that 40 to 50% of all those who enter teaching are gone within their first 5 years. Some of them were fired, some fired themselves. Some found the working conditions intolerable. There's no other profession that experiences this high turnover. The corporate reformers think that anyone can be trained in a year to be a principal, even if they were never a teacher. Last year, the George W. Bush Institute announced a goal of training, get this, 50,000 principals to staff half the nation's schools, drawing them from the military industry and the sports field. The Bush Institute announced that it's working closely with Teach for America, which sends thousands of young people into the schools each year with only 5 weeks of training. The Broad Foundation trains urban superintendents, even if they've never taught, and sends them to districts to advance the corporate reform agenda. So, two goals, privatization, deprofessionalization. What is the biggest obstacle to this movement? The teachers' unions. So if the corporate reform movement can get the unions out of the way, the path is clear for them. They can cut the budget all they want. They can change all the rules. If they can silence the unions, they can remove teachers' voices. They can proceed without any organized opposition. So why should the unions be turned into villains and into scapegoats, as they have been in the media? It's to silence you, to say that you have a self-interest. Of course, all those people who are out to make money on the schools and turn charters into for-profit and have online schools making millions, they don't have a self-interest. Only you have a self-interest. But to quote Martin Luther King Jr. again, quote, "History is a great teacher. Everyone knows that the labor movement did not diminish the strength of the nation, but enlarged it. By raising the living standards of millions, labor miraculously created a market for industry and lifted the whole nation to undreamed of levels of production. Those who attack labor forget these simple truths, but history remembers them." So now we see right-wing governors and legislatures trying to eliminate collective bargaining rights at the same time that they are slashing education budgets, attacking seniority and tenure, and any job protections for teachers. In this state alone, as you all well know, education spending has been cut by many billions. Class sizes are rising, teachers have been laid off, and the public is supposed to believe that this is the formula for reform? How ridiculous is that? This is the formula for destroying public education. There's no evidence that unions get in the way of high academic performance. The highest performing states in the United States are Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Jersey, all states with strong teachers' unions. The lowest performing states on the National Assessment of Educational Progress are the southern states where the unions are weakest. In Finland, which is one of the world's highest performing nations, virtually every teacher and principal belongs to the same union. Of course, there are unionized districts with low test scores, but virtually every one of these districts is low performing because it is highly segregated and has concentrated poverty. This combination is toxic. Poverty is the root cause of low academic performance, although reformers say it's just an excuse. There are very wealthy ideologues who simply don't like the public sector. They don't believe that government can do anything right and that the only way to improve the schools is to transfer control to private management. So the right wing promotes vouchers, charters, online learning, even homeschooling, anything but public schools. They believe in the free market. They forget, or they don't care, that the free market produces winners and losers. It never produces equality of educational opportunity. None of their preferred solutions has any research demonstrating its superiority or its efficacy. Take vouchers. We've had an experiment, or a demonstration rather, not an experiment, a demonstration in Milwaukee now for 21 years. 21 years of vouchers have failed to improve the scores of low-income students in that city. Students in the voucher schools do no better on state tests than students in the regular public schools. The voucher advocates who put this law through back in 1990 claimed that competition would cause improvement in every sector. But now we know, looking at the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is a no-stakes test, that black students in Milwaukee, who are supposed to be the beneficiary of the vouchers, get scores no different than black students in Mississippi, Louisiana, and Alabama. This is a disgrace. This is a scandal. There was no rising tide. No boats were lifted. Vouchers ought to be a dead issue, but they're back again. Governor Mitch Daniels in Indiana, with the support and assistance of Michelle Rhee, enacted a statewide voucher plan last year. Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin expanded vouchers by raising income limits. Just yesterday, Governor Bobby Jindal of Louisiana announced a voucher plan that will make 86% of the students in the state eligible for vouchers, plus charters. He wants an end to public education. The conservative governors of other states like Pennsylvania and Florida are pushing for vouchers, even though there is no evidence whatever that they improve student achievement. The research on charters is remarkably consistent. Charters vary widely in quality. Some of them get high test scores, some of them get low test scores. Most of them do no better on the tests than regular public schools. The research on cyber charters is also consistent. The virtual schools are hugely profitable for their sponsors, but student performance is much worse. graduation rates much worse than in regular public schools, yet they continue to grow, promoted by entrepreneurs who see the chance to reap big profits, and indeed they do. The CEO of the largest virtual school chain, K-12, who is a former executive at Goldman Sachs, was paid this past year $5 billion. About like your typical school superintendent, right? Only in the virtual charter world is this possible. No brick and mortar building, no nurses, no custodians, no fixed costs, just kids at home on a computer with their parent as their teacher. Corporate reformers push to tighten regulations on regular public schools while they are deregulating charter schools. If deregulation is such a good idea, why not free all the schools from these same burdensome mandates? The irony is that some of these groups that are pushing both teacher evaluation by test score and charters have created a situation in which the charters are free of the teacher evaluation by test scores. And I recently had an email from a principal in Colorado who said, to save my staff, I may have to become a charter school because the teacher evaluation mandate there is so burdensome. Charters should serve the children whose needs are not met in regular public schools, but increasingly they are skimming off the highest performing students in the poorest communities and leaving the regular schools in worse shape. Community after community is now torn by conflict between charter parents and regular public school parents fighting over resources and space. These battles divert our attention from the constant defunding of public education. Why not improve the schools we have? Why not give them the help they need to do better? Why are we closing public schools and replacing them with private management? Why are we fragmenting communities? Why tear down an institution that has been essential to our democracy? The public schools are a public good, like public parks, public beaches, public playgrounds, the fire department, the police department. We should not close them and open them as if they were shoe stores. The corporate reformers like to say that the teacher is the most important determinant of whether students get high scores or low scores, but this is not really true. The teacher is the most important influence on academic performance within the school, but the influence of the school and the teacher is dwarfed by the influence of family, particularly family income, and the student. Family income is the most reliable predictor of test scores. Students from affluent families have higher scores. Students from poor families have lower scores. This is true on the ACT, the SAT, the NAEP, and state scores. It's true on international tests as well. Of course, poor children can learn and poor children can excel, but when there's so much poverty, the odds are stacked against them. Children from affluent families have the advantage of educated parents. They have health care, nutrition, travel, good housing, economic security. Children from poor families are more likely to be ill, to be hungry, to be homeless, to have parents who don't speak English, to live in unsafe neighborhoods, and to suffer from many other burdens. It takes a calculated sort of heartlessness to say that poverty is just an excuse. It's not an excuse. Poverty is a scandal. Poverty is a fact. More than 20% of the children in this country live in poverty. It's rising. Among the OECD nations, we lead the world in child poverty. We are number one for the wrong statistic. We are behind only Mexico and Turkey. But we're the most powerful nation, the greatest economy in the world. Why do we have more than 20% of our children living in poverty? It's a scandal. Why don't we care? Why is it on the front page of the newspaper every single day? Income inequality has grown to scandalous levels, but corporate reformers would rather talk about teacher evaluation, the great red herring. Let's talk about teacher education evaluation and take child poverty and income inequality off the table. The corporate reformers have a favorite story, which you've all heard many times. They say that 3 great teachers in a row will close the achievement gap. But some of them say that it takes 4 great teachers in a row, and there are actually some others that say, no, it takes 5 great teachers in a row. But they cannot name a single district where this has ever happened. It's simply the speculation of their favorite economist. Michelle Reed didn't do it in the District of Columbia. The latest federal test for 2011 showed that the District of Columbia has the largest achievement gap of any city tested by the NAEP, more than double the gap for all big cities in this country. It's a 60-point gap in DC. It's a 30-point gap for urban districts in general. It's an outrage. If this were true, that 3, 4, or 5 great teachers in a row closes the achievement gap, why isn't it happening in all the charters? Because about 90% of them are non-union, maybe more than 90%. They can hire and fire teachers at will. They can fire teachers if their students get low scores, but very few charters can claim to have closed the achievement gap. And among those who make this claim, some have done it with high attrition rates, or by limiting the number of students with disabilities or English language learners. And they've got a formula. Keep out the low-scoring students and you achieve great results. It works. Corporate reformers say that they believe in the importance of teachers, but they don't trust teachers. They trust data. Nor do they trust principals to evaluate teachers. The reformers believe in carrots and sticks. They use those carrots and sticks to incentivize educators. The reformers advocate strategies to make educators work harder because they assume you're really not working very hard right now. The carrots and sticks are always tied to test scores. The reformers forget that tests measure student performance, not teacher performance. And they don't know that test publishers always warn that tests should be used only for the purpose for which they're designed. Corporate reformers love merit pay. They don't realize that merit pay has been tried again and again since the 1920s. It has never improved student performance. This is the idea that never works and never dies. In 2010, the National Center for Performance Incentives at Vanderbilt University released a major study of merit pay. The economists decided that the reason merit pay had never worked in the past was because the incentives were not big enough. You couldn't incentivize those lazy teachers by offering a bonus of only $5,000, so they offered a bonus of $15,000 to teachers in Nashville if they could get the scores up. They had a control group, they had an experimental group, and at the end of the 3-year study period, both groups got the same results. The bonus made no difference. The teachers were working as hard as they knew how. In 2007, New York City offered school-wide bonuses for 3 years. It discontinued the program in 2010 after wasting $56 million. Yet last week, New York City's Mayor Bloomberg announced that he will launch another merit pay plan similar to the one that failed in Nashville. This is the triumph of hope over experience. And the U.S. Department of Education has set aside and has now spent almost $1 billion on teacher incentive, which is merit pay. Merit pay doesn't work because schools are collaborative by nature. Schools are communities. Teachers share what they know with other teachers to help the students. The work of the reading teacher is affected by the work of the history teacher and the science teacher and every other teacher with whom the student comes into contact. Merit pay destroys collaboration. It destroys teamwork. It pits teacher against teacher and the competition for dollars. It replaces the interest of we with the interest of me. Of course, teachers should be paid more, but teachers don't want to work against one another. They want to work as a team. Merit pay is actually not a 21st century idea. It's tied very closely to the ideas of social efficiency that were very popular in the early part of the 20th century. That was a time when social engineers conducted time and motion studies, trying to figure out how to incentivize laborers to be more productive, to do such thing as to carry more bricks in an hour, or to produce more tons of steel, or to dig more coal. Today, there's a new way of looking at motivation. You can read about these studies in Daniel Pink's book, Drive. What the new cognitive psychology shows is that people are motivated to work harder and smarter when they work from a sense of idealism and purpose, when they work from a sense of professional autonomy. Teachers become teachers because they want to make a difference in the lives of children. You don't become a teacher to become rich. That's the wellspring of teachers' motivation, to make a difference in the lives of children. Teachers want to be treated as professionals. That's another wellspring of motivation. What the new cognitive research shows is that paying people to do what they want to do actually undermines their intrinsic motivation. By shifting away from intrinsic motivation to extrinsic rewards, people will perform for dollars, but they will not do it for the work itself. They lose sight of their actual goal. And ironically, as this research shows, bonuses undermine performance, causing people to work with less vigor and less passion because you've taken the source of their passion away from them. Teacher evaluation is a cardinal element in the race to the top. The Gates Foundation has poured hundreds of millions into teacher evaluation projects. As you well know, the Los Angeles Times created its own teacher ratings and shamefully published them. I was called when the story was being written initially, and the reporter, Jason Felch, said, "What do you think of what we're doing?" And I said, "It makes me sick to my stomach." Today, because of race to the top, dozens of states are trying to judge teachers based on whether their student scores went up or down. No one has figured out how to do it, but they're all trying. As a result, teachers' tenure, their reputation, and their job will depend on test scores. And thanks to the concerted efforts of the corporate reformers of Arne Duncan and Bill Gates, the national conversation is now focused on teachers and how to find those bad teachers and get rid of them. We hear very little about the conditions of children's lives, or the devastating budget cuts, or the increase in class sizes. Most scholars of testing and accountability say that value-added methods of assessment are not ready for high-stakes use. Most say that the measures are inaccurate, unreliable, and unstable. Most say that the ratings depend on many factors beyond the teacher's control. Most say that teachers who are effective one year may be ineffective the next year. Effective being defined as the scores went up, and vice versa, depending on which students are assigned to their classes. Most say that the ratings will vary depending on which test and which method is used. The corporate reformers ignore all of this complexity, they ignore the research, and they instead embrace a very simple and simplistic idea. Fire the bottom 5 to 10% of teachers based on the scores. If everyone did this, the theory goes, the bad teachers would be replaced by average teachers, and our nation's test scores would rise to the level of Finland. Because you know, somewhere outside that door, there's a long line of average teachers waiting to replace the bad teachers. They might even be superior teachers waiting to replace the bad teachers. This theory was propounded by Hoover Institution economist Eric Hanushek, and a recent study by a group of economists, Chetty, Friedman, and Rockoff, found that teachers who were able to produce higher test scores increased the odds that their students would get into college, that they would earn a higher income for life. I think one economist figured it was $250 a year for life, and that they would not become pregnant as teens. Now, it must be very reassuring as a fourth grade teacher to realize that what you did in fourth grade prevented your student from getting pregnant 10 years later. But we're glad to know, because we always believe that teachers have lasting effects. We all believe this to be true. We're glad to see it confirmed by economists who never set foot in the classroom. And it's not surprising that when students score well on tests, they're likely to go to college and likelier to have better jobs and less likely to become pregnant. But the authors of this study said to the New York Times that the lessons of their study was fire teachers sooner rather than later. Now, you have to wait at least 3 years to get enough value-added scores to be able to make that judgment, but the national media jumped all over this conclusion, and a number of governors immediately took this to heart, as did our mayor in New York City, as now we had proof that what they wanted to do, they could do with the blessing of these economists. But high-performing nations did not become high-performing by firing teachers. What will happen if we start firing teachers whose students did not make big test score gains? Many teachers will avoid teaching the most challenging students and avoid teaching in schools in the toughest neighborhoods. Who will want to teach under these conditions? I've had young people come up to me on college campuses and say, I've been preparing for years, hoping that I would be assigned to a school in a poor neighborhood, and now I know that if I do that, the school will be closed, I'll be fired, and I'll be stigmatized. I think I've chosen the wrong career. This is not a good signal to send. Economists should figure this out. Many schools, in response to this kind of requirement of basing teachers' livelihood on their test scores, will eliminate the arts, if they haven't already done it, and reduce time for physical education and other non-tested subjects. We'll lose time for history and geography and science and civics and foreign languages because they don't count. As Linda Darling-Hammond once said very memorably, you cannot fire your way to Finland. Now, I'm very happy to talk a little bit about Finland because we're very privileged tonight to have in our audience the leading educator, or leading spokesman for Finnish education, Pasi Sahlberg. Pasi is sitting over here. And I've told Sandra Jackson, I said, you have to have another evening and have Pasi talk to your members about how they did it in Finland. It is so exciting. I was there last September. Finland did not get to the top of the world league tables by firing teachers. It designed a long-term plan to raise the standards for entry into teaching. Teaching is now one of the most respected professions in Finland, along with all of the other professions. Only 1 of every 10 applicants to a teacher preparation program is accepted. Every teacher in Finland has a master's degree, 5 years of preparation for the classroom. Every child in Finland is guaranteed health care and intensive support in the early years. Once someone becomes a teacher in Finland, they never leave. Unlike us, they do not have a revolving door. Finland does not have any standardized testing. The children do take tests. The teachers make the test. When I asked Pasi Sahlberg about accountability, he said, we don't use that term in education. We talk about responsibility. He said, we trust our teachers. They are professionals. So if you can possibly go on Amazon.com and find it, his book is called Finnish Lessons. It's a wonderful book, and I was very inspired by what I saw there. It is a different vision of what education can be. And somehow we've got to get ourselves dug out of this hole that we have to measure everything that moves and judge everybody by those measures and call it accountability. Of course, you notice there's no accountability with the legislature. There's no accountability for district leadership. All the accountability falls on teachers. So here's the thing about value-added assessment, which is now sweeping the country because of race to the top and because of these economists who believe in it. It presents many problems. Most teachers are not teaching tested subjects. So that's a problem, and some districts and states are going to solve the problem by expanding the number of subjects that are tested. So there'll be tests for physical education. I don't know, how many push-ups can you do at the beginning of the year and how many at the end of the year, or something. There'll be tests for the arts. There'll be tests for everything. This is great news for the testing company, not such good news for the students. Some states like Tennessee have figured out how to evaluate the teachers of non-tested subjects. They ask them to choose someone else's subject that is tested as the basis of their evaluation. Imagine this, a teacher of chemistry being fired because the school's reading scores went down. He should have picked the math scores. It's a gamble. This is crazy. It makes no sense. Then there's the problem of collateral damage. We will see, as this movement advances, we'll see more narrowing of the curriculum as schools reduce time for non-tested subjects. We'll see more teaching to the test. We'll see more gaming of the system as schools and districts and even states engage in subtle schemes to discount the scores of low-performing students. We'll see more cheating, like the scandals in Washington, D.C. and Atlanta. We'll see more score inflation, as New York State had from 2005 to 2009 when it made the test easier and the cut scores dropped. And we'll shift responsibility for scores from students to teachers, and students will quickly understand that they have the power to fire their teachers by withholding effort. This changes the power relationship in the classroom. Having reduced teacher authority over the past few decades, we will see it battered even more. This won't be good for students or for teachers. Of course, schools should fire incompetent teachers. Who wants incompetent teachers in their building? No one who is incompetent should be allowed to teach. Teachers should be evaluated by master teachers who are principals and by their peers. They should get help to improve. If they can't improve, if they won't improve, if they've gotten every opportunity to improve and they can't do it, they should be fired. But here's what's scary. The more emphasis we put on testing, on getting the right answer, the more we discourage creativity, inquiry, playfulness, originality, risk-taking, freedom of thought, innovation. If we do this, we will kill the very sources of our nation's success. The most important outcomes of good education cannot be measured at all. I don't know if any of you tweet, but I started a little hashtag called Can't Be Measured, and we have hundreds of entries of the things that can't be measured. Here are some of the important things that can't be measured: love of learning, character, civic responsibility, compassion, a sense of justice, courage, integrity. Asking the right question matters more than getting the right answer. These are dark days for American education. A powerful movement has turned our attention away from what matters most and has encouraged us to believe that privatization will solve the problems of poverty. Education should be fully funded. We like to say that where there's a will, there's a way, but today we suffer from a lack of will, and so therefore we have no way. We have to stop the budget cuts. Class sizes must be reasonable so that every student gets the attention they need. We know that early childhood education makes a huge difference for children. Every student should engage in the arts, to sing, to dance, to perform. It should be their right. Every student should study history and geography and civics, should conduct experiments in science, should read wonderful literature, should learn a foreign language. Every student should have physical education every single day. Every child needs time to play. Our schools should have a health clinic, social workers, guidance counselors, librarians. Professionals should be prepared as professionals and treated as professionals. Reform will never succeed without the enthusiastic support of the people who do the work every day in the schools. You do not represent the status quo. The status quo is the culture of testing and accountability. It has dominated American education for 20 years. This is the status quo, and the status quo has failed. It's time for fresh thinking. It's time to draw upon the wisdom of those who teach in our schools and lead our schools every day. The corporate reformers are wrong. We must say so. We must speak out, blog, write letters to the editor, write letters to elected officials, visit our elected officials, bring them into our classrooms, let them know what you do, use social media, and if none of that works, engage in direct action. Organize, agitate, demonstrate, run for public office, run for the school board, speak up, act up. Silence equals complicity. We must stand up for public education, where the doors of the schoolhouse are open to all, where no one has to enter a lottery to get in. We must stand up for the future of our children. We must stand up for the education profession, which requires highly trained and experienced professionals. Be not afraid. We are the many, they are the few. Stand up for institutions. History will judge us by what we do now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ravitch. That was great. Thank you very much. So we have a wonderful opportunity now to ask questions of Dr. Ravitch. Like I said, there are 2 mics. Please line up right here at the front. And there's also a mic in the balcony. You're all educators. I know you know the difference between an interrogative and a declarative statement. Questions are the former. All right, so we'll start here, Mike, in the front.
So no statements, just questions? Well, first of all, thank you for not only educating us, but inspiring us tonight.
Thank you.
And so since I sort of had a statement, I'll turn it into a question.
Okay.
What sort of actions, such as going to the, and I'm sorry I use this, the anti-Ravitch who's speaking on February 7th in Oakland Paramount Theater, Michelle Rhee. National Day of Action on March 1st, where students and teachers and educational professionals from throughout the country are going to take a day of action. What other direct action do you propose we do? Because I do believe the political process right now is so distorted, we have to get out there and take that direct action. What do you think, Ms. Ravitch?
Okay. First of all, I agree with you, and I've had the experience going to Washington and visiting senators and congressmen and discovering that they're totally out of touch. They have no idea what you think, none. And I met with key members of the House and the Senate, some of them from California, and so I would say go in large numbers and sit in the office of Nancy Pelosi. Go in large numbers and sit in the office of George Miller. Go to sit in large numbers in the office of your senators and your representatives. Let them know how teachers feel. I've been told by senators and members of Congress that NCLB works. They don't have a clue. I've met many more teachers than they have, and I haven't met a teacher who said, I like NCLB. And you know what they're planning now with the reauthorization of NCLB, they'll give it a different name, but it'll be no better. So you've got to let them know what you experience because they don't know. That's a start. And then go and visit the people who are demeaning teachers and attacking teachers. Let them see your faces in large numbers.
Thank you. Well, I want to thank you for coming here and also the CTA and AFT for having you here. The question I have is that if you're aware of the systemic corruption that's going on in the charter schools, where charter school lobbyists are sitting on school boards and sitting in governmental positions and then actually voting for privatization and charters despite the fact that they have a financial interest in that. Do you know about that? And also, how should that be confronted when politicians who should be enforcing the law and investigating and prosecuting are not doing that and exposing these corrupt relationships?
Yes, I'm very aware of it. There's a website which is run by a parent in Oakland, and it's called Charter School Scandals. And it's a voluminous website. And I know of, I don't know all the scandals in California, but I know of scandals all over the country where charter school operators give generously to political campaigns, and then when their candidate gets elected, they get lots of charter schools. The single biggest contributor to the governor of Pennsylvania is a charter school operator in Chester, Upland, Pennsylvania. He runs a Chester Charter School, which has taken off almost half the children in the district. The remaining public schools are in bankruptcy. The teachers are working for free to keep the children from having no education. And the governor, who received a $300,000 contribution from this charter school guy and put him on his education transition team, has refused thus far to give any funding to this district, which is in bankruptcy. And by the way, the district has been under state control for 10 years. So where's the accountability? So yes, there are a lot of scandals because there's so much money behind the charter movement. And where there's this much money, there's bound to be money used for lobbying, money used for political favoritism. I mean, I could cite you chapter and verse with charters in Ohio, run for profit. 80% of the charters in the state of Michigan are for profit. Anytime somebody sets up a school and says it's for profit, you know that their first interest is the shareholders and not the children, and that's wrong.
Thank you. We'll go ahead and take a question from the balcony, please.
Hi, good evening. A lot of the teachers up here are wondering what you would advise teachers who are caught up in these accountability systems, teaching to the test, taking multiple tests, weekly tests, hours and hours of tests, no science, no social studies, not even writing, just reading and math. What would you advise teachers who are caught in that situation currently?
Well, I would say first of all, you have to make sure that your kids get the scores or you might be fired, so you have a problem. But you should be as subversive as possible and sneak in as much arts as you can. I mean, let's face it, children have to have a reason to want to come to school. And I don't know of any children who say, I can't wait to get to school for test prep. So there must be some joy. There must be something that they come to school for. And I think they'll understand that they're in complicity with you to beat the test, but that you must give them the source of joy that brings them to school every day.
Thank you. Down here on the right.
Hi, thank you for coming. Can you say a few words about good old-fashioned competition? Isn't a public education a psychological and intellectual dimension where competition doesn't really fit in that? How about if I take all your resources away and then let's compete?
Well, I think that education is not by nature a sector where competition works. There's no evidence that it works. It's not a team sport. It's not like football or basketball. There are certain sectors, like the family, doesn't work through competition. You don't say to your children, I'm going to love you more than you if one of you eats your dinner. I mean, you don't do that. You don't say, you're the best child I have and you're the worst child. I mean, I'm from a family of 8 and we competed with each other, but we never felt that our parents were pitting one against the other. Every child is unique to their parents, and every child, in fact, is a unique human being. And I think that the challenge to us, and it's very hard to figure out, I haven't figured it out, maybe somebody here can, how we free our minds from this free market idea that everything operates by competition and by carrots and sticks, and how we can have a different vision. And I think that the beginning of change starts with understanding that what we're living with now is a failed regime. And that if we can begin to understand the depths of this failure of choice and competition and accountability and punishing people who are doing good work in low-performing schools, and begin to have a vision instead of, if you didn't have the scores, what would you do to meet the needs of your children? If you had the ability to intervene early and to help them and give them what they need to learn to read, to feel a sense of success in school, if you didn't rank them and rate them and say you're good and you're not good, if you didn't have that situation where 50% of them are always going to be in the bottom half, we are actually, I think, destroying our children. I don't want to talk about self-esteem because it's a loaded subject in the state of California, but I think we're hurting children. We're hurting them because so many of them are being told from the beginning, you are no good. And that's wrong. We should really encourage children to, as I learned in Finland, the phrase was to develop the humanity of every child. What a goal that would be for us.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you. So happy to have you here, Dr. Ravitch. As I understand, part of the success in Finland is that they didn't set out just to make excellent schools. They set out for equitable schools and for equity. And that was kind of the false promise behind No Child Left Behind as well, that we were going to make sure everyone had a good school. What do you think would be the right policy incentives to bring a true picture of not perfect equity, but more equitable advantage? Because in Finland, I think they get equitable prenatal care too. Like it doesn't start when they get to school.
Sure. Well, I hesitate to talk about Finland in the presence of Pasi Sahlberg. But I will say that I can talk about No Child Left Behind. No Child Left Behind was based on a false premise, and that was that if we tested enough, no child would be left behind. But it's the nature of testing that it's standardized testing. There's a norm. Half are going to be in the bottom half and half are going to be in the top half. There's no way to have no child left behind with standardized testing. So it's a phony promise. And, the premise of No Child Left Behind is that if you just keep raising standards, raise the bar, and the kids who can't clear the 4-foot bar are somehow going to clear the 6-foot bar. But more kids keep falling behind. So we have not reduced the achievement gap. We have seen very little progress, and we're pursuing a false goal because we see in many, many places where scores have gone up, and then the students, when they graduate, need remediation when they go to community college because all they learned was how to take a test. They actually didn't learn how to read, they didn't have science, they didn't have history, they didn't learn math, but they learned all the test-taking tricks. And who's going to hire you to be able to take standardized tests? This is not a useful skill. So here's the secret of Finland, which I will reveal, although you do have to read Pasi's book, Finnish Lessons. They have a strong social safety, social welfare net. And they have health care for all. The children in school have health care. They have a preschool. School doesn't start until age 7. The children have free preschool before then. They have a lot of playtime. They have 15-minute recesses between classes. They have a shorter school day. They believe that less is more. They have free higher education for all. And they don't have any charter schools and they don't have vouchers. They have a strong public school system because they have a sense of responsibility for the generation that's coming up. It's their children. And I should add as the punchline, they have very high taxes. But you know what? They're happy.
Thank you, Dr. Ravitch. Back to the balcony. And I apologize, but please tell us who you are.
Okay. My name is Andy. I'm a teacher at Mission High School here in San Francisco. First off, I want to thank you for not just speaking out against No Child Left Behind, which for many of us has been obviously bad, but for also taking a stand against Race to the Top, which has actually been worse for public education. I think it's very important that you took a stand against that. Secondly, I was hoping you could talk a little bit, you really laid out how No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top don't just target the poor, but actually they target our Latino students, our African American students, how these policies are inherently racist, and they drive teachers to not serve those students. Those of us who want to serve them the most are being incentivized, if we listen to this stuff, to not teach them. So I was hoping you could talk a little bit just about how these policies are racist. And last, I guess I'd ask you to comment on the Occupy movement and what lessons we can learn from that in terms of the fight we have to do to fight for full education. And if you had heard about the strike of the Tacoma teachers this fall, or just several months back, where they were asked to raise their class sizes and cut their pay. They did a 10-day strike and they pushed it all back. Mm-hmm. So I was wondering if you could comment about that.
Okay, that's a lot to comment on.
Yes.
But let me say to begin with that there have always been many routes to success in American society, and being good in school was one of them, but it wasn't the only one. And what this No Child Left Behind and Race to the Top is trying to do is to say you are not a success unless you get high test scores. And that's going to be a very small number of kids who will have high test scores. And what has happened over these past 10 years of No Child Left Behind is that the kids who are left behind are African American, Latino, kids with disabilities. They're the ones who are at the bottom. They were at the bottom 10 years ago. They're at the bottom now. So now they're given an official stamp of you're left behind and you did not succeed. And this is the only way to succeed. I try to think about why did we do this? Why would we take testing, standardized testing, which we know reflects socioeconomic status? We know that it's a reflection of how much education your parents had, and some kids can break through it, but most kids don't. Why would we take this measure and say this is the only measure of success that counts? The only thing I can figure is it was designed by people who had high test scores. Except there was George Bush, you know. A period of 10 days or 2 weeks, they cleaned out almost every Occupy settlement in the country. There was a library at the New York City Wall Street site. My book was part of this library. They had carefully cataloged something like 5,000 books. The whole library was thrown into a dumpster. And it was, I felt like I was watching Fahrenheit 451 played out before my eyes. And, you know, members of the press were beaten and pushed back. It was very brutal. But what I think that the lesson was that direct action works. At first, when I saw the mic check, I didn't get it. Then when I saw it being done, I got it. Because if you go to a meeting of the Board of Education, or in New York City, it's called the Department of Education, they won't let you have the mic. They'll turn it off after 2 minutes. But when you do the mic check, they can't turn you off. So they literally close down meeting after meeting by producing 200 people, which in a city of so many millions of people isn't that hard. But it showed the power of direct action, and I think it captivated not just the nation, but the world. The question is, and that is that there was such the sustainability of this, because they prided themselves on having no organization. And so now they have no organization. I was invited to speak, and I never found out who invited me or where he was, so I didn't get to speak. It was actually very comical. So there's a problem, I think. If you don't have an organization, you have an organization. You can do direct action. You work together. I mean, this is, I think, the lesson you can learn from Occupy is A, it works, and B, you have an organization, so you can be far more effective.
Thank you. Down here in the front, please.
Oh, hi. My name is Lorraine Hunt, and I teach a 4-5 combo down in San Jose. And actually, I have two questions. One, looking into your crystal ball, they're looking to reauthorize the Obama administration to 2020. Do you think that this is going to be my entire teaching career being, judged on test scores of my students? And the second question, the bigger question is, will we ever restructure our schools? The way that we run our schools now, it's always been run the same way. So are we looking at productive citizens, and how are we going to do that? Because that doesn't seem to be the way things are going with 50% dropout in our students. Whether we have high test scores or not, the way we're running our schools doesn't seem to be best for having more productive citizens coming out of our school system.
Well, I'm a historian. I don't have a crystal ball. But I would say that if the administration's proposal it's called the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, if it goes through and teacher evaluation a la Race to the Top is incorporated, yes, you will spend until 2020, or certainly for the next 7 years, being judged by your students' test scores, which is wrong, wrong, wrong. And I've become critical of various let's say, teacher organizations that feel that they have to accept this because it can't be stopped. I say when something's wrong, you do try to stop it. What I would love to see, and hopefully this will emerge from your organizations, your voices, the consultations with you, is a strong teacher voice that says we are responsible for our students, we know that what we're doing isn't working, doubling down and making the test even more onerous will not empower our students, will not make them want to come to school, will not reduce the dropout rate. This is the wrong track. We want to take a totally different approach in which we can work with our students to help each of them achieve whatever success they can achieve, but not have them come to school and feel that they're being punished in their life. by coming to a system that has marked them for failure.
Hey, thank you. Down here on the left.
Boy, I have so many questions, but I'm going to pick one that's sort of playing devil's advocate. You speak about class size, and we all know, and I'm Ted Altenberg, teacher in Santa Cruz County. We all know that class size is important, but the research doesn't show a big impact. I assume you know the book Visible Learning by John Hattie. Anyway, the research shows small impact on student achievement. So my questions are, is there other research that's not being publicized as much, or how else can we explain the importance of class size?
I think the research is very strong for the early grades, K through 3, and it's also very strong for minority kids. I think for older kids, it's less strong, but there is a kind of common sense element that says when you have children with so many diverse needs who come to you, some of whom have disabilities, some of whom are struggling with English, some of whom have all kinds of emotional and social issues, the bigger the class, the less attention each one gets. It's logical. So I've never yet met a parent or a teacher who said that class size doesn't matter. It's only economists who say that. But I'll bet it matters for their children.
Thank you. Back in the balcony, I believe that's Bill.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Bill Walderston, longtime teacher in East Oakland and someone who works for the Oakland Education Association. Two questions. First, we're seeing efforts, I know in California and I'm sure elsewhere, to push decentralization of education under the rubric of equity. And yet, often it's a code word for laying off senior teachers and for austerity. So I'd like your thoughts on that. And the second question is a sort of broader question. Do you think we can ever make progress in terms of the kind of goals we have for a more egalitarian society, including what we believe in terms of public education, when we have two parties of big business that dominate the political scene?
Well, okay. All right. Ask the first part of your question again. I'm having trouble with two-part questions. I remember the part about the two parties. Oh, about the autonomy. Yeah, okay. We did this in New York City, and here's the reason that we did it. They had something in New York City called Fair Student Funding, which is like what in California is going to be called weighted student funding. And the purpose there was to give each principal a lump sum budget and to say, you use this budget as you see fit. This gives you autonomy over staffing and so forth. And at the same time, a lot of schools were being closed because they had low scores, and a lot of senior teachers got let loose into the labor market. And then the principals who had autonomy over their budgets didn't want the senior teachers because they cost too much. And so we now have hundreds and hundreds of very experienced, highly effective teachers who can't get a job. They float from school to school. They're rotated once a week at a different school as subs. And these are people who have 20 or 25 years in teaching, who are excellent teachers. But no one wants them because they cost too much. And that's where this is going. As to the two parties, I don't know, we have to pick one party. I assume it'll be the Democratic Party, and bring pressure on them because, frankly, I don't see how the president can be elected without the enthusiastic support of teachers. So he must hear the teachers' voices. He must hear what you believe and what you know.
Okay, we have time for about two more questions, so I'm going to start right here, please.
Hello, my name is Ann Bjornson. I teach at a middle school, Giannini Middle School in San Francisco. I was thrilled when I read one of your first articles where you talked about how a favorite teacher of yours probably couldn't get a job these days. And I just wanted you to know that meant a lot to me that you pointed that out. And also, I was thrilled just now when you talked about how we should be educating our children to have humanity. And it reminded me of a letter written by a principal to his teachers the first day of school. They found it in their mailboxes. And he said in the letter, I am a Holocaust survivor, and I saw things which no human eyes should see. And I ask each of you, as you teach the children, to teach them to be humane. The concentration camps were built by educated engineers. The medical experiments that were cruel were carried out by educated doctors and nurses. And I fear that all this is going to bring us to a time when we are teaching kids to be technocrats and heartless and materialistic and so on. So I was really happy to hear you say that. And finally, I wanted to ask you if President Obama has been reading your writings and listening to or knowing what you say, and I hope so, because it's wonderful.
Thank you. I don't think so.
Maybe we can all send him a copy of your writing then.
Well, I think just to briefly summarize what you said, it's the question that I go back to of what would you do as a teacher if you didn't know the test scores of the children in your room? You would look at each one of them as a child who is precious to somebody, who deserves everything that you can give them. And you need the resources to be able to help them. And, you know, most of you will not have those resources. And that's what you have to continue to fight for. I know there have been many layoffs in this state. There have been many budget cuts. And the message has to go out to the public. This is wrong. These are your children. This is the future of this state. This is the future of this nation. You can't let them continue to cut the seed corn of our future.
Thank you. Here in the front, please.
So first, I want to thank you for being here, and I was thinking about your email address has something about the word gardener in it, and I was thinking about how you're planting these seeds of hope in all of us here, and that, you know, after you leave, how important it is that we continue together as a community. And I was also thinking about my master teacher who's in the audience, who 8 years ago, you know, taught me how to teach, and my friends in my cohort from UC Berkeley. And so, you know, I'm in it for the long haul, and I'm thinking about these alternative teacher preparation pathways, TFA, the New Teacher Project, and how districts are partnering with them so that these alternatively prepared teachers will be hired before, say, an out-of-district teacher with years of experience. And I was wondering if you could explain a little bit about that policy nationwide, but particularly in Oakland.
I think that Teach for America is a very good idea and a terrible organization. Because Teach for America to me is like the Peace Corps, and I like the Peace Corps. Young people go off to dig ditches and to help experienced people do whatever they need to do, but they don't go off to become Foreign Service officers for 2 years. They don't go off to become ambassadors for 2 years. This is far too much responsibility, and what the organization does that I think is wrong is to say our young people are smarter than everyone in the classroom, and just because they went to Harvard or some other Stanford, the first day they walk in, they're already an effective teacher, and that's ridiculous. You cannot be a 22-year-old. You know, I've read some of Wendy Kopp's books, and she makes this claim again and again. She says, we don't have to wait to fix poverty. We don't have to wait to fix poverty. Why? Why don't we have to wait to fix poverty? Why shouldn't we try to fix poverty? Can't we carry two thoughts in our head at the same time?
Thank you for being here. Tonight, a lot of what you said focuses on class and the issue of poverty, is that it being the heart of our problem, and therefore should definitely be, as teachers, our focus in the fight back. So the question I had is, to what extent you think everyone here and this membership, to what extent do you think we need other public sectors in this fight beyond just public education? And if you could speak on that a little bit. I know as a teacher and an organizer, it's hard to balance fights on site with fights in the district, with the bigger fight in Sacramento, and all of them are important, and it's very difficult to know where to fry your fish. So I wanted to know what you thought about that.
Here's the alliance you need. You need an alliance with all the public sector workers, because you saw in Wisconsin and in Ohio, the attack is not just on teachers' unions, it's on the public sector workers. But that's not all. You also need to have an alliance with parents. They are your natural allies. And I believe you can also reach out to your civic leaders. You can also reach out to your Main Street businesses, because your Main Street businesses are being squeezed by these big corporations. They're multinationals. They have no loyalty to Main Street. Main Street doesn't want your school to close. You should reach out and bring in as many members of your community as you can in support of public education. This is a public responsibility, a public duty. It's part of who we are as Americans. We can't let them take it away from us. Thank you so much.